A corpse washed ashore. Chained to its wrist, a black briefcase of secrets. The Nazis believed every word. Hitler himself was deceived. But the man, he never lived. His life was a lie. His death changed the war. Not tanks, not planes, not armies. One body, one briefcase, one deception. This is Operation Mincemeat. On the morning of April 30th, 1943, a Spanish fisherman named José Antonio Rey Maria was rowing his boat off the coast near the mouth of the Tinto River in the province of Huelva. This region lies in southern Spain, a country officially neutral in the Second World War, yet one that maintained ambiguous ties with both the Axis and the Allies. As he went about his daily fishing routine, José noticed a body floating limply in the water. It was the corpse of a man dressed in a British naval officer's uniform, wearing a pale yellow life jacket with a black briefcase chained tightly to his right. José immediately dragged the body ashore. As local residents and several Spanish soldiers gathered around the corpse, they discovered that it belonged to a British officer, Major William Martin of the Royal Marines. On his person were full identification papers, a wallet, keys, love letters from a woman named Pam, a bus ticket, a club membership card, and various other personal items, all appearing entirely authentic. But the most important item was inside the black briefcase chained to his wrist. 2 top-secret letters from high-ranking British officials revealing the Allies' strategic plans in the Mediterranean. One of the 2 letters was from General Sir Archibald Nye, Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, addressed to General Harold Alexander, commander of British forces in North Africa. The letter suggested that the Allies were preparing to invade Greece and Sardinia, and that the expected invasion of Sicily would merely be a diversion. If these documents were genuine, they held immense strategic value and could potentially alter the entire course of the war. Spanish authorities immediately contacted the British embassy in Madrid, but what no one among them, not even the German or Spanish intelligence services, could have imagined was that Major William Martin had never existed. He was a fictional persona, carefully constructed by British naval intelligence in collaboration with a small circle of officers from MI5 and British military intelligence. The body, the anonymous man washed up on the shores of Huelva, was, in fact, a carefully selected corpse, whose sole purpose was to carry false information and mislead the Germans. What José discovered that morning was not merely a lifeless body adrift at sea. It was a vital piece of a global deception operation, a bold and daring plan, codenamed Operation Mincemeat, a name that may sound absurd, even laughable, but beneath it lay a deception so intricate, so convincing, that it succeeded in fooling Hitler himself and the entire intelligence apparatus of Nazi Germany. World War II, 1943, the Allies had successfully driven German and Italian forces out of North Africa following their victory in Tunisia. But in order to strike at the fortress of Europe, they needed to open a new southern front. The next step would be an amphibious assault on one of the key islands in the Mediterranean. The problem was this. Sicily was the obvious choice. It lay close to Tunisia, controlled critical sea lanes, and served as a natural springboard into mainland Italy. The British knew it, the Americans knew it, and even Hitler knew it. Churchill once said, "Whoever controls Sicily controls the entire Mediterranean." But if the Germans were certain Sicily was the true target, they would heavily reinforce the island, send in additional troops, fortify thousands of coastal artillery positions, and lay mines across every beach. Tens of thousands of Allied soldiers could die before even setting foot on land. Therefore, success required not only firepower, but surprise. British intelligence was handed an extremely dangerous mission: convince the Germans that Sicily was not the main objective. That was when a bizarre idea emerged. A plan with no guns, no aircraft, no spies in enemy territory. Just a corpse. The first man to envision this idea was Flight Lieutenant Charles Cholmondeley, an intelligence officer working in Room 13 of MI5. This unit specialized in deception operations, using fake documents, forged identities, and elaborate counterintelligence tricks to mislead the enemy. Cholmondeley was an eccentric figure, tall, severely nearsighted, fascinated by wasps, and gifted with a wildly imaginative mind. He had once proposed dropping dead rats stuffed with explosives into German supply depots, or deploying fake spies disguised as priests. But this time, his idea was unusually practical. Cholmondeley proposed, if the Germans believed that an Allied officer died in a plane crash while carrying classified documents, then why not create a fake dead officer with a false identity and let the body wash up somewhere the Germans will find it? He initially called the concept Trojan Horse, a reference to the legendary war ruse of ancient Troy, one of history's most famous deceptions. When Cholmondeley presented this idea to the Royal Navy, it quickly caught the attention of a more influential figure, Ewen Montagu, a prominent Jewish lawyer who was then serving as a senior officer in British Naval Intelligence, NID. Before the war, Montagu had been one of London's most accomplished criminal barristers. During the war, he was known for applying legal logic and rigorous analysis to intelligence planning. Montagu immediately saw immense potential in Cholmondeley's idea. He proposed expanding it into a continent-wide strategic deception. Montagu wrote, "For a deception to work, it must be completely believable, down to the smallest detail. And nothing is more convincing than a dead man." At the time, the idea of using a corpse to carry false information was not entirely new. Back in 1939, a secret memo had circulated within the Royal Navy titled the Trout Memo, signed by Rear Admiral John Godfrey, but likely authored by his personal assistant, a young officer named Ian Fleming, who would later go on to create James Bond. The Trout Memo compared deception operations to trout fishing, where every fish needs a different bait. In suggestion number 28, it asked, why not use a corpse, dressed as an airman, with false documents in his pockets, and allow it to float ashore where the enemy can find it? At the time, the idea was considered too far-fetched, but by early 1943, a real incident changed minds. In September 1942, a British Catalina aircraft had crashed off the coast of Cadiz, Spain. One of the casualties was Lieutenant Colonel James Hilgarth, who had been carrying certain military papers. His body, along with a briefcase, was washed ashore and promptly seized by Spanish security services, who had close ties with German intelligence, particularly the Abwehr, the Nazi military intelligence agency. Although the documents were not especially important, the incident exposed a dangerous vulnerability. Any corpse washing up in Spanish territory could be secretly searched, and its contents sent straight to Berlin. This made Spain, despite its official neutrality, an ideal location for executing a deception operation targeting German intelligence. Montagu later wrote in his memoir, "We needed a suitable body, someone no one knew, no one would claim, no one would question, an unknown dead man brought back to life under a completely new identity, carrying false secrets that could reshape the Mediterranean front." The plan began to take shape, a corpse disguised as a mid-ranking British officer carrying a critical but fake document. The body would be released off the coast of Spain, where German intelligence would almost certainly find it. If it worked, Hitler would believe Greece was the true target and Sicily merely a feint. The Germans would then redeploy forces away from Sicily, exactly as the Allies hoped. The operation was formally approved by the 20th Committee, the British counterintelligence body that oversaw deception campaigns led by key figures like John Masterman. They gave it the code name Operation Mincemeat. Montagu deliberately chose the name. He believed the absurdity of it, mincemeat, would make it sound trivial, even laughable, and therefore draw no suspicion. But behind the strange codename lay a highly sophisticated operation where every detail, the type of ink used, the texture of the paper, the spending habits and romantic life of a fictional soldier had to be meticulously crafted to deceive one of the most fearsome intelligence machines in the world, the Nazi Reich. For Operation Mincemeat to succeed, the British needed one crucial thing: a suitable body. Not just any corpse would do. The body had to meet several very strict conditions. First, it had to be male, of average build, and physically intact, without any deformities caused by injury or fire. Second, he must have no known relatives, no one who could identify him, so as to avoid exposure or legal complications. Third, the cause of death had to align with the cover story they were about to create: death by drowning or a plane crash. In January 1943, Ewen Montagu met with Dr. Bentley Purchase, the coroner of the City of London, who oversaw all cases of unexplained deaths in the area. Crucially, Dr. Purchase was one of the few people in Britain legally authorized to access unclaimed bodies without triggering a criminal investigation. After a period of searching, Bentley informed Montagu that he had found the perfect candidate, Glendower Michael, a 34-year-old man from Wales who had been living rough on the streets of London. He had no family, no job, no permanent address. He died after ingesting white phosphorus, a toxic substance found in rat poison under murky circumstances. Was it suicide or accidental? For British intelligence, his body was almost ideal. No visible wounds, minimal decomposition, and an ordinary, unremarkable face, not easily recognizable. Glendower Michael's death was kept completely secret. His body was placed in a hermetically sealed steel container, packed with dry ice to keep it deeply refrigerated, a temporary preservation method in the days before modern freezers. The coffin was stored in the basement of a London hospital, locked away so that not even medical staff knew who was inside or why. Montagu and Cholmondeley now began building a life for their fictional man, Major William Martin, a person who needed to be believable down to the tiniest detail. They gave him a full name: William Martin, born March 29, 1907 in Cardiff. He was assigned the rank of Major in the Royal Marines, high enough to carry sensitive documents, but not so senior as to attract excessive scrutiny. His unit was listed as No. 3 Commando, then stationed in London and preparing to be deployed to the Mediterranean. That detail was important. If German intelligence checked, they would find the unit was real, and Martin's presence there would make perfect sense. Montagu and his team knew very well German intelligence was highly skilled at analyzing background identities. If the Germans were to believe in William Martin, he would need a personal backstory, a social network, and ordinary human habits. They prepared a photo of his girlfriend, a smiling young woman in a summer dress, actually Jean Leslie, a secretary at MI5. She was given the name Pam, Martin's fiancée. Love letters, handwritten in soft black ink, emotional and romantic. One line read, "I miss you terribly, Willie, and I can't bear how you keep going away like this." A laundry ticket, a lunch receipt from a restaurant in Piccadilly, and an old movie stub, a hotel key, an officers' club membership card, and an unpaid bill from a shop. They even included a letter from Martin's father, mildly scolding him for not writing home in 2 weeks, to further add realism. All these items were known as the trash of life, mundane, random objects that make a person's identity feel real. Details that could not be convincingly faked without lived experience. The most important element was the black leather briefcase chained to Martin's right wrist. Inside were 2 confidential letters. The first, from General Archibald Nye to General Harold Alexander, implied that the Allies were preparing for major operations in Greece and Sardinia, and that Sicily was merely a diversion. The second letter, from Lieutenant General Louis Mountbatten, was addressed to the commander of the Mediterranean Fleet, referring to Major Martin arriving to assist with logistics, making his presence seem routine and necessary. These letters were typed on official letterhead with real signatures, copied from old documents by Montagu. printed on paper with authentic watermarks, and sealed in envelopes marked "personal and most secret" in red ink. To increase realism, they lightly sprayed the documents with saltwater mist so the ink bled slightly at the corners, suggesting they had been soaked at sea. They even added small strands of wool and sand inside the briefcase to give the impression the body had floated for days before washing ashore. Montagu would later write, "A man can die in minutes, but to bring him back to life in the imagination of the enemy, you must build an entire world around him." From birth certificate to service record, from financial habits to social relationships, the entire identity of William Martin was fabricated from scratch. Only one thing could never be allowed to happen. No one could ever discover that the body was a fake. After weeks of meticulous preparation, the full identity of Major William Martin was complete. The steel container holding the body of Glyndŵr Michael was sealed and labeled to indicate that it contained the remains of a Royal Navy officer who had died in an air crash. The next step was to deliver the body to the designated drop point off the coast of Huelva in southern Spain, a location selected with exceptional precision. Why Huelva? A seemingly simple question, but of critical importance. Huelva was located in an area heavily influenced by German intelligence networks, particularly the Abwehr station in Madrid, led by Colonel Karl Erich Kuhlenthal. Kuhlenthal was a seasoned spy, regarded by the British as one of Germany's most effective receptors of British deception. If a dead body carrying military documents washed ashore near Huelva, it would almost certainly end up in Kuhlenthal's hands, and from there, on Hitler's desk. Additionally, though officially neutral, Spain's military and intelligence authorities were strongly sympathetic to Nazi Germany. Abwehr agents operated quite openly there and often received information from drift sources, washed-up Allied equipment, wreckage, or even bodies from sunken ships or downed aircraft. To get the body to Spain without arousing suspicion, Montagu requested the help of the Royal Navy. The mission was assigned to the submarine HMS Seraph, an S-class boat known for its stealth capabilities, under the command of Lieutenant Commander Norman "Bill" Jewell. Jewell was calm, intelligent, and tight-lipped. He had carried out numerous covert operations in the Mediterranean, including inserting agents into Italy and Algeria. Though not told every detail of the plan, he was given one absolute order: release a body at sea off the coast of Huelva in such a way that it would appear to have drifted naturally. April 17, 1943, at Holy Loch in Scotland, the steel coffin was loaded aboard HMS Seraph. The shipping papers described it as the body of a Royal Naval officer killed in an air crash at sea, a plausible cover for transport. Jewell received a special instruction: you are not permitted to let the body touch Spanish soil. No landfall. Release it at the exact distance, close enough to be found, but far enough not to arouse suspicion. Seraph departed from Scotland, cutting through the Irish Sea, then down the French and Spanish coasts to the rendezvous point off Huelva. For 10 days, the body was stored in its sealed container, housed in the torpedo room, surrounded by ice and the deep chill radiating from over 200 kilograms of dry ice, enough to slow decomposition. Aboard the submarine, only Jewell and 2 senior officers knew what was really inside. To lighten the mood and avoid emotional strain, the crew gave the corpse a nickname, Mr. Bill, a morbidly affectionate moniker, as though he were just a strange, silent passenger awaiting his final destination. In the early hours of April 30th, HMS Seraph surfaced silently 1.5 nautical miles off the coast of Huelva, exactly at the predetermined coordinates. It was around 4 a.m. The sea was calm, the wind mild, the sky still cloaked in darkness. Jewell assembled the crew on deck. Before them lay the steel canister containing Major William Martin. There was no flag-draped coffin, no grieving relatives, but Jewell instructed the men to stand solemnly. He read a brief passage from the Bible, the story of Lazarus and death, then gave the signal. 2 sailors opened the canister, removed the body, now clad in a life vest, boots with the briefcase chained to the wrist and papers tucked into the overcoat. Jules later wrote in his memoir, his face was pale, cold, but still intact. We bowed our heads. Then, with a gentle push, the body slid into the dark waters. The body of Major William Martin slowly sank, then rose again, just as intended, and began drifting toward the shore. With the mission complete, HMS Seraph submerged and turned back toward Gibraltar. No one on board spoke for hours. The operation had now entered its riskiest stage, the waiting game. Everything from this point on would depend on the Spanish authorities. Would they recover the body? Would they open the briefcase? Would they pass the contents to the Germans? And most critically, would the Germans believe it? The Naval Intelligence Division, MI5, and even Churchill himself were now anxiously waiting, in silence, for the enemy's response. On the morning of April 30th, 1943, the body of Major William Martin washed ashore on La Bota Beach near the town of Huelva, Spain, exactly as planned. A local fisherman named José Antonio Rey Maria discovered the corpse and alerted the Spanish Civil Guard. The body was clad in a British military uniform, wearing a life vest bloated from the water with one hand already discolored from early decomposition. The most striking feature was the black leather briefcase chained to his right wrist. The man carried complete identity documents, and at first glance, everything pointed to a genuine British officer. Spanish authorities were skeptical, but proceeded with official diplomatic protocol. The body was transported to Huelva Provincial Hospital, then buried in Nuestra Señora de la Soledad Cemetery, in a simple but proper Catholic funeral, as the victim wore a crucifix around his neck. The headstone bore a brief inscription: William Martin, born 1907, died 1943, beloved son of England. May God receive his soul. For the British, this grave was more than a burial. It was final proof that William Martin had lived and had died. Though Spain was officially neutral, its security and intelligence services were deeply infiltrated by the Germans. The British hoped that if the body fell into the hands of Spanish officials, the documents inside would be secretly copied, then passed on to German intelligence, particularly Abwehr, run in Madrid by Colonel Karl Erich Kuhlenthal. From the German perspective, Kuhlenthal was one of their best information conduits from Western Europe, regularly receiving letters, reports, maps, and classified materials passed discreetly through Spanish officers sympathetic to the Nazi cause, such as Captain Ramon de la Puente or Lieutenant Colonel José López Barón. One of the key factors that made Operation Mincemeat plausible was Spain's ambiguous diplomacy under General Franco. Although officially neutral, the Spanish government allowed German agents to operate with relative freedom in cities like Madrid, Seville, and Huelva. The Abwehr, particularly Kuhlenthal, had personal relationships with many senior Spanish military officers, especially within the military, intelligence, and political police branches. One such officer, Captain Jaime Fuhrer, was a trusted Spanish intelligence figure and a known contact of Kuhlenthal. Fuhrer was the first to examine Major Martin's briefcase. Upon discovering multiple documents marked top secret, he did not hand them over to the British embassy. Instead, as the British had hoped, he secretly passed the contents to Kuhlenthal. As soon as Kuhlenthal received the documents, Abwehr began evaluating their authenticity. The two letters were sent to Berlin, where they were examined by military analysts at the German High Command. The paper quality, the tone, the layout, the signatures, everything looked genuine. One analyst wrote in an internal memo, "If this is a deception, it is a highly sophisticated one, something only the very best of British counterintelligence minds could have devised." And yet, there was no sign of forgery. The documents appeared completely real. More importantly, they aligned with other pieces of intelligence the Germans had gathered through indirect channels, such as deliberate leaks planted by the British in Cairo and Algiers, forming part of the larger smokescreen built around Operation Mincemeat. The British couldn't afford to follow up or ask about the missing officer. That would raise suspicion. Instead, they waited, nervously. But MI5 had quietly set up an intricate, indirect monitoring system. They had agents observing the German embassy in Madrid. They also had sources in the international postal system, which allowed them to track letters being sent from Madrid to Berlin, including copies of the documents found on Martin. More significantly, MI5 had a mole inside the Spanish government who confirmed that the British documents had been copied and then returned to the British, as if they had never been touched. This gave the British near certainty the Germans had seen the material and had no reason to suspect it was fake. Ewen Montagu wrote in an internal report, "We bet on the enemy's greed and overconfidence, and it seems they took the bait." To drive the deception home, MI5 staged a reaction, a performance of concern and urgency. The British Foreign Office sent an official letter to the embassy in Madrid inquiring about the disappearance of an officer carrying sensitive documents. They requested assistance in locating the briefcase and verifying whether the documents had been opened. Shortly afterward, signal intercepts from Britain's Bletchley Park listening stations confirmed. Abwehr believed the deception entirely. Kuhlenthal wired Berlin. The British appear unaware that we possess copies of the correspondence. They seem extremely anxious. They believe the documents are lost. The Germans didn't just believe the story. They began to act on it. And that would be the turning point, revealed in the next chapter. In early May 1943, the documents recovered from the corpse of Major William Martin, including 2 top-secret letters, were delivered to Berlin and placed directly in front of Adolf Hitler. At first, some officers in the German High Command expressed hesitation. They asked the obvious question, why would a mid-level officer be entrusted with such crucial strategic documents? But the language, paper, signatures, and overall coherence were flawless. No one could point to a single inconsistency. More importantly, the contents of these letters matched several other intelligence sources Germany had gathered from Turkey, North Africa, and the Balkans, all part of a carefully orchestrated deception campaign constructed to support Operation Mincemeat. On May 12, 1943, exactly 2 weeks after the body was found, Hitler issued an urgent, top-secret directive to the German High Command. Immediate reinforcements are to be deployed to Greece and Sardinia. Troops must be withdrawn from Sicily and redistributed across the Balkans. A new defensive line is to be constructed in the Peloponnese and on the island of Crete. In total, Hitler ordered 2 panzer divisions to move from France into the Balkan region, 1 infantry division to redeploy from Ukraine to Greece, over 100 coastal artillery pieces, along with thousands of combat engineers, to fortify Sardinia. Even the German Luftwaffe presence on Sicily was significantly reduced. Aircraft were reallocated to support emergency landing fields in Athens and Rhodes. General Alfred Jodl, chief of operations for the German High Command, wrote in his diary, "The Fuhrer believes Sicily is a diversion. The true objective is Greece." This assessment stems from documents obtained in Spain, there is no doubt. By mid-June 1943, just 3 weeks before the Allied launch of Operation Husky, British and American intelligence reported an obvious weakening of German defenses in Sicily. No additional divisions were moved into the island. Existing fortifications were not reinforced. No reserve forces were seen arriving from mainland Italy. Meanwhile, in Greece, the population noticed new coastal artillery emplacements, military checkpoints, and increased patrols through mountainous roads. In Sardinia, long convoys of supply trucks rolled through the night, and shipping ports began receiving military cargo from Marseille. All signs pointed to one conclusion: the Germans had believed the story and were preparing for an invasion that would never come. Back in London, the codebreakers at Bletchley Park intercepted German military signals and intelligence dispatches. As soon as Ewen Montagu reviewed the decoded orders and troop movement reports, he realized Operation Mincemeat had not only worked, it had surpassed expectations. One intercepted cable from the German embassy in Madrid to Berlin read, "The information received from Spain is entirely reliable. The documents show no evidence of forgery. The British are unaware we accessed their contents. Montagu noted in his final report, "We crafted a story, and now Hitler is writing the next chapter with his own troop movements." When MI5 presented their findings to Prime Minister Winston Churchill, he remained cautious but hopeful. During a high-level war cabinet meeting at Chequers, Churchill made only one now famous remark: "Let us hope the dead man kept his secret." On July 9, 1943, Operation Husky, the largest amphibious invasion in history up to that point, began. Nearly 160,000 Allied troops, primarily British and American forces, stormed the southern beaches of Sicily. Though there was resistance, the campaign succeeded beyond expectations. German defenses were thin, poorly prepared, and quickly withdrew northward. In just 38 days, Sicily fell completely into Allied hands. More than 130,000 Axis troops were captured. This marked the beginning of the end for Benito Mussolini, who was deposed shortly after and eventually led to Italy's unconditional surrender. And it all started with a dead man, a body, a forged identity, a black briefcase containing 2 deceptive letters. This grand deception, Operation Mincemeat, not only misled the German High Command, it helped shorten the war and saved tens of thousands of Allied lives. After the resounding success of Operation Mincemeat, contributing to the collapse of the Axis defenses in Sicily and leading to Mussolini's downfall, Ewen Montagu and his colleagues should have been honored, credited, and recognized, but they were not. No one knew. Not a single newspaper reported it. Not a single line appeared in the Allied military's public reports, because Operation Mincemeat, no matter how successful, was still a top-secret counterintelligence operation. Making it public, even indirectly, could reveal the methods, the resources, and most importantly, expose how the British handled disinformation and used a dead body as a weapon of war. After Mincemeat, many other deception campaigns were still underway. British intelligence did not want the Germans, or any other nation, to know that they could fabricate an entire identity, an entire life, just to mislead the enemy. Montagu, Cholmondeley, Masterman, the planners, were all forced into absolute silence. None of them were allowed to tell their wives, children, friends, or anyone else, even after the war. Even the file of Major William Martin, the man who never existed, continued to remain in the Royal Navy's administrative system. For many years after the war, the name stayed on the casualty lists, recorded in national files and war memorial rolls as if he were a real soldier. After the war, many captured German intelligence officers were interrogated about Operation Mincemeat. Some of them, including Colonel Kuhlenthal, expressed astonishment when they learned they had been deceived. They had never suspected that the documents in the briefcase chained to the corpse's wrist were forged. From May to September 1943, German intelligence had relied on the information from this operation to arrange military strategy. They redeployed troops, shifted their defensive priorities, and lost Sicily. In post-war testimonies, some former German officers admitted outright, if this was a trick, then it was pure genius. It struck directly at our arrogance and overconfidence. It was not until 1953, 10 years after the operation, that Ewen Montagu was finally permitted by the British government to write about Operation Mincemeat in memoir form, under the condition that some figures remain anonymous, technical details be minimized, and the true source of the body never be revealed. The book, The Man Who Never Was, quickly became a publishing phenomenon and was adapted into a film of the same name in 1956. Though a blend of fact and fiction, it stirred the world's imagination about the dead soldier who carried the secret that fooled Hitler. However, in the book, Montagu never disclosed the true identity of the dead man. Glyndŵr Michael, the nameless man from Wales, remained in the shadows. For decades afterward, historians, journalists, and independent investigators tried to uncover the true identity of Major William Martin, but all ran into a wall of silence from the British government. It was not until 1996 that the true identity of the man who had played Martin was officially inscribed on his grave in Huelva. A second plaque was added beside the original tombstone, engraved with the words, "Glyndwr Michael, who served as Major William Martin, R.M., and who lies here unknown but never forgotten." The nameless soldier was finally called by his real name. More than 80 years after Operation Mincemeat, intelligence, military, and strategy academies worldwide still use it as the prime example of one of the most successful deception operations in modern history. No weapons, no military campaign, no spies operating deep behind enemy lines, only a corpse wrapped in a lie so perfectly constructed. Montagu once wrote, "War is not only bombs and bullets. Sometimes a corpse washed ashore can change the course of history." And perhaps it is Glyndwr Michael, the poor, nameless man, who remains the most vivid proof of that truth, even though he died before ever knowing he would become the silent hero of a free world. In war, a great battle is not always decided by the number of tanks, the might of aircraft, or the scale of an amphibious landing. Sometimes, it begins with a corpse. Operation Mincemeat was not merely a successful intelligence operation. It was a testament to the power of imagination, of patience, and of absolute precision in the art of deception. A life was constructed, an identity was fabricated, a lie was told, through the meticulous use of the truth. And at the center of it all was a man, Glyndwr Michael, unknown and forgotten in life, but who in death helped alter the course of the Second World War. In an age where technology and firepower dominate every battlefield, Operation Mincemeat reminds us, sometimes victory comes from the most unlikely of places. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this video with others. See you in the next mission.